This video is my guide for creating and running traps in your TTRPG campaigns. Guides like this take a long time to make, so please like this video and subscribe to the channel if you'd like to see more guides and videos like this in the future. The term trap refers to a device with the intention to catch something. Whether that's a trespasser or prey is really up to the creature who laid the trap in the first place. Pitfalls, snares, and cages are great examples of this classic trap, but things have become a lot more complicated when you apply this logic to a fantasy game where magic exists. Some trap designers aren't going to be thinking about capture, but instead thinking of maiming or killing their target. Deadly traps in principle sound pretty good, but they're not very practical. Very few people find save or die traps particularly fun, but that doesn't mean that you can't use dangerous or even deadly traps in your games. The only thing I'll say is that you should make sure to signpost them. By that I mean give your players clues that there might be a brutal trap nearby. Maybe a poor soul has already sprung it previously and their remains are splattered on the walls. Or a thief notices grooves in the wall which represent a spear or a dart trap of some sort. The more dangerous a trap is, the more it should be signposted. One thing that I think is genuinely misunderstood about traps is whether to hide them or not. I think most traps should be visible, especially the dangerous ones. This is because the best traps are able to accomplish both or either of these two things: change or choice. By change, I mean change the situation. A portcullis trap splits the party and can alert nearby guards, changing the scenario and adding excitement to the game. Now the party needs to react and solve this new challenge, taking on this threat from one or both sides. And I've actually killed more characters with a portcullis than I have with any other type of trap, as players have died from whatever fight ensues after the trap is triggered. I don't know if that's something that I should really be proud about. By choice, I mean the difference between walking into a room and a trap immediately going off, and walking into a room and seeing a lever or a pressure plate or something similar, where now the party can think, do I step on it? Do I pull the trigger? Do I pull the lever? This creates choices for your players. Providing change or choice makes your traps feel intelligent, or at least gets your players to think rather than mindlessly shuffle through the dungeon you have constructed, rolling a perception check at every door, wall and floor tile that they come across. We want our players to think and collaborate. That's a reason why we come together and actually play this game together. We want our players to also feel smart, because when they feel smart, they are proud of themselves, and more importantly, they're enjoying the game. I tell you, if I feel like I've done a really good job, I'll feel really good about the game I'm playing. And, when I feel stupid, I'm probably not going to be having a good time, especially if the DM's making me feel stupid. I don't like that at all. And I think that follows up with what I'm going to say next. Traps need to be explained well by the Dungeon Master. I've had DMs who had no fucking idea what trap they were using, and the way that they were explaining it was abhorrent, quite frankly. They couldn't convey it in a simple and accurate way, and they were getting frustrated because we weren't understanding and I wasn't understanding. But the reality is we were getting frustrated because he wasn't able to tell us, and we were just expected to figure it out. And when adding traps to your dungeons, actually make a note of how the trap works and how it could be disarmed potentially. You don't need a lot of information there, just a bullet point or two. It's really that simple. Bullet point for how much damage or what the negative effect is. Bullet point for how it's disarmed and how it works. Very, very simple stuff. Very simple stuff. But traps are They belong to the exploration pillar of D&D. And I'm sure those of you who frequent my channel and have been subscribers of mine for a while will know just how important I think this pillar is. Because it's the least appreciated one, but I think it has the most room to improve your games. Think about it. If you're not very good at exploration, or if you've played TTRPG for so long and you've played systems that don't encourage it, of course it's going to be the weakest part of your game, right? I'm not saying that's the case for all of you. I'm sure some of you guys have got some really swanky exploration, survival stuff going on. But for a lot of DMs, it's the biggest room for improvement. Exploring is so important, and we can use traps to contain and develop what it is that the party are seeing and doing. This process of handling a trap as a player is usually split into 3 different phases. The first is detection, the second is disarmament, and the third is consequences. Okay? Detection is all about discovering the trap, as I'm sure you guys have already figured out. Honestly, it's the least interesting part of this process with a trap. In many systems, it's having your players roll a check to see if they spot the trap, and determining whether they've rolled high enough or not. And if they haven't rolled high enough, then they've got to walk forward and accept what punishment you've given them. I tend to skip this part unless it's a very weak trap. I think if it's a very weak trap, it's okay to not really signpost it very well, to not really have a lot of information related. Just get your players to stop and think before they continue, if you're not going to signpost very much, so they can come to the conclusion themselves to look for a trap. And it goes without saying, I will give players hints unless they are running down the corridor, or if they are like preoccupied or something like that. I think trap paranoia from the player's perspective is probably one of the worst things about traps in our games, and we want our players to trust that they won't be blindsided when they're actually in a dungeon, when they're actually exploring and stuff like that, and they can actually focus on solving a problem instead of having to try and find one with an arbitrary roll system that doesn't really motivate players to actually do well with traps. I think disarming is next, and it is the meat of this process. As I said before, traps belong to the exploration pillar of D&D, so we can really treat traps like puzzles in a way. Instead of having players roll a simple check to disarm the trap, let them consider solutions of how they can either fully disarm the trap or just pass by it without setting it off. Maybe they jam a piton into the gears of the trap, shimmy around, or jump the pressure plates or the tripwire. Or they can cut the counterweight to the trap and then slowly lower it by holding onto the rope or the string or the wire that it's on chain that it's attached to. I still like there to be a dice roll involved in this step, but I'd rather the check make more sense than just being a Dex Thieves Tools check or something similar. If you wanted to lower the counterweight, maybe it'd be a strength check. Knowing where to jam the piton sounds like maybe an intelligence challenge. Some of you may disagree with that, but I find that most of my players come to the table to roll dice, and if my players come up with a kind of foolproof solution, something that shouldn't really fail in any given circumstances, then I will just let them disarm it, right? But if there is a chance based on what they're telling me that it might not work, then I think it is fair to say that there should be a DC. But if it's a good idea, the DC will be lower. Don't have set DCs for traps. Don't just set it to DC 25 no matter what the party do. I mean, sure, you can give them advantage. What if they only have a +3 to their check, right? They're not going to be able to succeed. Unless you roll at natural 20s or automatic successes, which is fine, but I don't unless it's an attack roll, right? Or a spellcasting check, I suppose. But that is something to consider. If I was going to say, I would set a base DC, if they don't really do much, to like DC 18, and then maybe if they come up with a good idea, it'll go down to like DC 10. or DC8. You get the point, right? I think that's a lot more fun. I don't want to overwhelm any of you guys with the information that I'm sharing with you today, so feel free to like rewind if you're not picking up on certain things that I'm saying. There's a lot of information in this, but traps shouldn't be very complicated. I think once you've run a portcullis in this way, it'll be easy for you to do it again and again. Traps are supposed to be a fun challenge for your players, so we don't want to make them overly complicated or confusing. I think in regards to positioning traps, it's fair to say that certain parts of an ancient temple, for example, will probably not be trapped. At least the areas where the creators of the place and the traps expect visitors. This could be, like a general prayer room in the temple, for example, on the upper floor. But areas where access is naturally restricted, like vaults, catacombs, and the like, traps are going to be a lot more common there because the creator wants to keep guests, visitors, and intruders away. Right, so that's one thing that I think about. I see some people, they just like make dungeons using the DMG and they roll if there's a corridor, if there's a trap or something. I mean, that's cool, that's fun for like the wacky kind of adventures and one-shots that you want to run. But if you're trying to make a dungeon that makes sense, then you do need to consider where the traps would be. Would they be on the upper floor? Would they be on the lower floor? Why would they be there? Once you have an understanding of what you're actually making, it's easier to figure out where you should be putting traps. Where the... it's a good idea, right? If you've got like a really big villain in your dungeon, then think from the villain's perspective. Where would the villain want their traps to be? Where would they want them to set them up? Or where would the collective goblin nest, where would the goblins want their traps to be? Probably in the entranceway somewhere, in like the biggest entryway, the one that's easiest for the humans to crawl through or climb through. That makes sense. I've had a door covered with a fire rune, which the party was able to spot immediately and decipher using an intelligence check. They weren't able to disarm it at the time because the wizard had run out of spells, so wasn't able to dispel magic, and they were concerned that manually disarming the trap with like a 10-foot pole or like throwing a corpse at it may alert nearby enemies or trigger some form of negative consequence. So they decided to turn back and go in a different direction. And this is just another way that traps can be used, not to damage your players, but potentially, to hinder them instead, to get them to go in a different direction. Traps do not need to be used as a resource tax. And I did a poll a while ago where we talked about this, and there was quite a few people who thought that they should be resource taxes. And that's fair enough. I think in 5e, the characters have so much health that it's really difficult to kind of challenge them unless you're using these kind of resource taxes. But what you can just do instead is make your encounters a bit more difficult, make them more challenging, throw in a henchman or a alpha of the pack of monsters that you're using, or just give your monsters a bit more health. Is a way of definitely doing it. It's a bit more interesting that way. Obviously, dealing damage to your players for not successfully handling a trap is one of the main ways you can punish them for failure, but it isn't the only way. And I'm going to list on the screen here a bunch of other things that you can do, which I think are really interesting. I'd love to see more Dungeon Masters expand on the consequences that they provide player characters, because just having them take damage whenever they fail a check is so uncool and so unfun. And I mean, in my last session as a player in my first day game, the DM had us take, I think it was like 1d6 cold damage for being out in the rain for an hour, right? Which is just it's really funny, to be honest. 1d6 damage is enough to kill a commoner in 5e, which is the system that we're using. And I tried to argue the point relatively softly. I don't want to come across as a rules ambassador or a player bully or something like that, but I tried to explain that to her, and she wasn't really having it. And I think the moral of the story is that there are so many better, more realistic ways to slow down or block a party, like exhaustion mechanics, for example. I think exhaustion is underrated. I think more DMs should use it. I prefer like attrition, where like if you fail, you get a -1 to all checks. and then -2 to all checks, -3. I think that's how they're doing the new exhaustion rules in 5. Yeah, I don't really know. I haven't really read the book because, quite frankly, I don't give a shit. It's only because some of my IRL friends want to play it that we're actually playing it at the moment. I'm starting a Shadow Dark game pretty soon, which I'm excited about. I think we'll do Curse of Strahd and Shadow Dark. That sounds, honestly, that sounds really good because, like, think about it. Like, you got Curse of Strahd, which is very like vampires and werewolves, and it's quite like grim dark. And you got Shadow Dark, which is quite a it's a more brutal system. You know, characters aren't superheroes and they can die a bit easier. And yeah, I'm excited to see how it's going to work. I did a actually, you know what, I'm getting distracted. Let's continue the video. Maybe I should do some more live streams so I can talk about stuff like this. And I've had a lot of success with repeating traps. That's the one where there are more kind of identical traps like it further ahead, like a corridor filled with 5 swinging scythe traps. Yeah. So, you know, obviously it's going to suck for your players to set off a couple of those, right, and take damage. But once they start realizing that it's like a repeated trap, they will be able to probably completely bypass the rest of them, which is fantastic. You know, we don't want our players trying to face tank the entire dungeon and just take all the damage because they're, you know, really strong or because they're not thinking very well. And I mean, it goes without saying that we don't want our players to be brain dead goldfish that swim around and not knowing what the fuck is going on. Our greatest weapon as dungeon masters is the knowledge that we have, and it's something that we should be really openly sharing with our players when appropriate. Thank you for watching today's video. If you enjoyed it, as I said before at the start of the video, consider giving the video a like and subscribing to the channel to see my future videos. Check out my Discord if you want to join my community and our monthly events that we have. And sub to my Patreon if you'd like to gain access to charts, tables, and systems to level up your games. I'll see you guys next time on Loki's Lair. Until then.